If you have your Bibles this morning, would you meet with me in 1 Samuel chapter 20? 1 Samuel chapter 20 this morning. You and I have up to this point learned so much about the friendship between Jonathan and David. And it's amazing how much attention the Bible gives us between these two men. And it's important for us to just take our time to study their interaction and their conversations and this covenant that they made with each other. Because you're going to find that this is the last time that we're going to see this lengthy interaction between these two men. There's going to be one more short interaction, and that'll be it. So, one of those things that we've learned about Jonathan, especially from this chapter in particular, is that he was a man who stood for the truth. And if we're not convinced of this, then in verse 16, it's going to really seal the matter for us as we pick up where we left up last week. And to give you just a brief context of what's happening, David has fled from Ramah, and he has met with Jonathan, and he's trying to convince him that Saul is still out to assassinate him. And Jonathan is finding this really hard to believe. So they make this covenant and they make a plan with each other. And we're going to pick it up here in verse 16. May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Now, as I previously said, this was a man who stood for the truth. And we know that because he invokes the name of the Lord here. This issue was not a disagreement between David and Saul from Jonathan's perspective. It very much involved God himself. And there was a clear path of right and wrong. There's disobedience and obedience. There's righteousness and wickedness. And Jonathan fully believed that God is the one who would determine the outcome and the fate of these two men. But notice he takes this one step further, and he says in verse 16, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." Now, why is that significant? Because Jonathan is placing his own father, King Saul, in the category of being David's enemy. And he's willing to believe and stand for the truth so much, even if it means seeing his father on the side of being judged by God. He is so unbiased at this moment, he realizes that even though his own father would stand against God, he is still willing to be that devoted to both God and David. That's his standard. And that's the same standard and the same allegiance that Jesus calls his disciples to. Jesus says in Luke 14, verse 26, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father or mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." And the Bible doesn't use this word hate as the same way we use it in the English language, because Jesus is not commanding hostility here. He's not commanding that we literally hate our family, that we despise them. He is illustrating the steep cost of following him. What he is saying is that our allegiance and our affection for Christ should be so deeply rooted and so immense and immersed that by quality comparison, any other relationship would look like hate. And Jonathan is willing to say, even if my father is an enemy of God, he is worthy and deserving to be to be chastened and judged by God. And as I read this and I studied it, you and I learned something very important here about the concept of vengeance. Because if you ever noticed how much attention in the Bible is given to this concept of retributive justice and retribution, it's incredible how much the Bible instructs the people of God on how to manage this leering temptation. And it's because God, in his infinite wisdom, knows that the people who are seeking Christ will have to endure great personal offenses. And because as common as the endurance of pain and hurt is to us, so is the burning temptation to take matters into our own hands in order to retaliate and satisfy this burning sensation that says, if you harm me, it's gonna backfire on you, and you're gonna get it worse. And it's incredible because as I was reading in Romans this week, the verse that jumped out at me was Romans 12:19. You've probably heard it before. But I saw it in a way that I've never realized before, and it really made me consider the deep and absolute seriousness of obeying this clear instruction. Romans 12:19 says, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord." And the thing that just jumped off the page at me was that phrase, vengeance is mine. And I thought to myself, God is making an exclusive claim here. He's saying the thing of vengeance, of getting even, of retribution, it exclusively belongs to me. That doesn't belong to you. You have no right to entertain it. You have no right to execute it. Now see this. If vengeance is God's rightful possession, then what do we do when we attempt to take vengeance into our own hands? What's that called? Theft. Now here's what I understood from that. Taking vengeance is not just wrong, because in itself it's ungodly. But seeking vengeance is vile because I am robbing God of something that exclusively belongs to Him. And that is Paul's point here, that God in His own ways has His own ways of bringing people to their senses and of letting them know the results of their own wickedness. And it's not up to us to hurry that process along or decide the means of punishment. So let me ask you this. Are you robbing God in taking vengeance in your own hands? See, Paul's not placating on the fact that offenses should not hurt us because he knows that they hurt us. But Paul is compelling us to make the harder choice. Whether we're going to trust God or not, to leave our vengeance in His hands instead of taking it in our own. May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. Then Jonathan reassures David of his love and devotion and comes up with a plan. And Jonathan and David are both in agreement with each other because they want to find out this mystery of Saul's heart and his attitude towards David. Look at verse 18. Then Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was at hand, and remain beside the stone heap. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send the boy, saying, 'Go, find the arrows.' If I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are on the side of you, take them,' then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it will be safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." So Jonathan presented David with this new plan, but he says it's not going to be obvious. It's going to be in disguise. I am going to shoot arrows, and depending on what I say will indicate to you Saul's reaction and your safety. And what's incredible about this is that there is yet another interesting phrase that proves to me the depth of faith that Jonathan had in his God. Look at verse 21. "And behold, I will send the boy, saying, 'Go, find the arrows.' If I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them,' then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for the Lord has sent you away." The Lord has sent you away, David. You know what I take out of that? That this man was a man who believed that although Saul might be the reason for David's departure and the fact that he fled, God was really the cause behind it. As much as King Saul was king and has the authority and can push you around, David, and drive you into the wilderness, God is the one who's actually sending you. And see, the confidence that we can share in that is that even though we are facing the injustice of man, even though we're in a place where all the odds are stacked against us, God's sovereignty and his providence is still at work. And I wonder if we have the same understanding about God, especially when we're experiencing something that David might be experiencing. Do I really believe that God is a God who gives and takes away? Do I really believe that it's God who's closing that door? Do I really believe that it's God who determines every step that I take, whether I'm aware of his supernatural intervention or not? Proverbs 21 verse 1 says, "The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord, and he turns it wherever he will." And David did not only experience this, but the nation of Israel experienced this. Because they found this to be the case again and again, both to their dismay when God would send foreign kings against them, and to their joy when he would raise up kings to save them. And if we really believe that God is sovereign and is providential over our existence, my existence, then we ought to say, well, then bring 10 souls into my life. Because God is going to control each and every one of them. And he's going to use them for my sanctification and for his glory. But look at Jonathan's instruction to David. He says in verse 19, "The day after tomorrow, go to the place where you hid when all this trouble began, and wait by the stone of Ezel." What does David have to do while Jonathan is out seeking an answer? Wait. Something we're terrible at. And the significance of this is huge because David now has to put his whole life on pause and come face to face with the fact that he's not in control. His entire life, it seems, is in the hands of a madman. So this waiting, although it might say 3 days, it probably felt like an eternity for David. And he probably prayed in that time because David did not have the luxury of staying in the palace with his wife. Because you come to verse 24 and you realize where he's waiting. It says David hid in the field. That's where he's waiting. A rock became his pillow for 3 nights. And this is significant because I look at this and I can't help but smile. I can't help but smile because I see that God is willing to make even his most faithful and devoted servants wait. Not just wait for an answer, but be uncomfortable while you're waiting. So why does God make us wait? Well, he actually tells us why. And the first reason is a reason we may or may not like. He makes us wait that he, meaning God, might gain the greater glory. He makes us wait that he might gain the greater glory. Exodus 14, verse 17 and 18 says, "I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them." And here it is, "I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen." So there it is. The reason why God makes us wait. It's not about us. It's about him. God said to Pharaoh in Romans 9, verse 17, "I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth." And when we remember that his ways are higher than our own, and our thoughts, that his thoughts are higher than our own, there's just one thing left for us to do. Accept God for the way that he is and not object to his ways. The phrase, wait on the Lord, is a constant refrain in the Psalms, and it's a necessary word because of how often God keeps us in that stage of waiting. And he keeps us waiting because he's not in a hurry as we are. It's not his way to give more light into our future than we need, or to guide us more than one step at a time. You know who else God made wait to the point of being uncomfortable? Habakkuk. Habakkuk wanted to know why God allows evil to happen. It's a fair question, one that we would love the answer to. So God made a deal with Habakkuk to wait for the answer. The answer will come, but on God's appointed time. In Habakkuk 2, verse 3, it says, it speaks of the end and will not prove false. It says, though it may seem slow, wait for it will surely come, and it will not delay. I believe God makes us wait for another reason, and it's because those who are willing to wait, even to the point of being uncomfortable, are declared righteous. As Abraham was. Abraham was declared righteous by believing in simple faith what God said. And so too was Habakkuk. Habakkuk 2 verse 4 says, behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith. And that's a promise that's quoted 3 times in the New Testament. So the balance is this. The greater position, the longer God waits, the greater his glory. Or in other words, the greater position of discomfort we're in while we're waiting, the greater the glory we give him. So if God is willing to do it for David, his chosen one who would become the king of all Israel and who would be the example of all kings of what to imitate, then surely he's going to make me wait. Surely I can't come into his presence and complain that he didn't answer my prayer on the very night that I prayed. I can't come into his presence and complain because even though I'm in a tough season for a while, it's not because he doesn't love me. He made David wait. So the fact that he makes us wait is not a sign that he's displeased with us or he doesn't love us by any means, because David would wait. Then we read in verse 24. So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul, but David's place was empty. Now you can just imagine the suspense of just reading this, right? This is the moment we're all been waiting for. This is Saul's heart exposure. But there's so much truth here for our benefit. For example, this feast was very highly religious. And we know that for 2 reasons. First, according to Numbers 28, verse 11, the whole purpose of this feast was that it marked Israel's consecration to God for every new month of the year, and was observed by sacrifices and smaller social feasts. And secondly, we know this feast was highly religious because it says in verse 26, Saul said nothing that day, for he thought something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he is unclean. So we know from the Old Testament, especially from Leviticus 22, that there were certain ceremonial activities, such as touching a dead body, or drinking the blood of an animal, or having intimate moments with your spouse, that would make a person unclean for a religious feast. So in Saul's head, he's thinking David must have done something that made him unclean. Maybe he's at a funeral or something, and that's why he's not here. So we know that this was a spiritually motivated feast. But if this feast is a clear observance and celebration of God, what does that say about Saul? Well, think about it. He's in attendance. Not only that, he's participating. He's eating at this feast. Guess what? It doesn't mean a thing about his spiritual condition. You know what I read here is that you can have people who attend a church or any other religious gathering, and they project a religious image, and yet their heart is filled with as much envy, malice, and rage as they can hold. Think about this. Saul's there to observe this feast, and instead of drinking to peace and reconciliation, he hoped to drink the blood of David. And what I read here is that just because someone is projecting a religious image on the outside, it offers no proof that the presence of Christ is ruling in their hearts. What I see here is an echo of Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 4, verse 5. It says, "Therefore the Lord will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart." God is more interested in the motives of our hearts even more than our own actions. So even though Saul is present, he's involved, it adds no validity to his spiritual condition. Verse 27, "But in the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to Jonathan, 'Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today?'" So one day passed. He let David's absence slide. But on the second day, he demands an explanation. And think about the craziness of this. You actually expect David to show up even after you've attempted to kill him more than once. But think about it. That's what pride does. It makes you the center of your own universe. So he thinks, where's David? Because now it's the second day. He's supposed to be in the clear. He's supposed to be at this feast. So he interrogates Jonathan, saying, "Hey, where was he yesterday and where is he today?" But notice the wording of his question here. He says, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal?" You know what's happening here? Saul's rage has risen so high that he couldn't even say David's name. And instead, he refers to him as the son of Jesse. Now, we think that is far-fetched in our life, but it's one of the clearest red flags of stage 4 envy and stage 4 unforgiveness. And here's how that could play out in real life. You can be in a group of people and somebody mentions the name of someone else who you have a deep grievance or immense bitterness towards, and just the mention of their name can erupt volcanic emotions. Volcanic emotions, a rush of anger, a rush of bitterness. And Jonathan at this moment seizes the opportunity to cast the bait to see how Saul is going to respond. Verse 28 and 29. Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, because our family is observing a sacrifice in town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me go away to see my brothers. That is why he has not come to the king's table.'" So the bait has been cast. It's there right before Saul. And I'm very, very, very confident he was not expecting Saul's reaction. Verse 30. Saul's anger flared up against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother, to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die." Now, if you can picture this, it's not hard to imagine the silence that has come over the room. as Saul erupts at this religious gathering. The music stops, the people stop, and the silence is just, it's so thick. What do you take out of these answers? Well, there's so much. First, his jealousy is not bound by any boundaries, because now the conflict is not just between him and Jonathan and David. Now this disagreement has become public. It's been seen by everyone who's attending this feast. And think about these words here. It says, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman." And this is irony, because if anything, he's the son of a rebellious and perverse man. Perverse and rebellious woman. Who's your dad? Because you can't be my son. My son wouldn't do what you're doing, Jonathan. My real son would not betray me. You're seriously going to stand for this son of Jesse over me? Do you feel the weight of that? This is painful. Now tell me this. Are we ready to be disowned for our faith? Because that's the principle here. Jesus said in Matthew 10, verse 34 through 36, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household." And the connection between Jonathan's devotion to David and Jesus' words is that they compel us to make the hard choice, even if it's in our own family. Now notice how Saul calls him rebellious. What's so confusing about that? Because we know who's really being the rebellious one here. It's Saul. We know that. But because Saul was the center of his own universe, he had a clear enough conscience to label the one who's actually standing for the truth as a rebel. You're the rebel, Jonathan. And here's another principle. Are you willing and are you ready to be labeled as evil for standing for the truth? Because that's what he's enduring now. And Jesus also felt the weight of this moment. In Luke 22, verse 52, it says, "Then Jesus spoke to the leading priests, the captains of the temple guard, the elders who came for him. And he says, Am I some dangerous revolutionary that you have come with swords and clubs to arrest me? Why didn't you arrest me in the temple? I was there every day." And Jesus here is appealing to their cowardice. He had no habits of being someone who is evil, like a thief. He didn't display himself or his power in secret. He had no company of armed men around him to guard him and defend him if things went bad. So he's essentially asking, if I am evil and as dangerous as you label me to be, why didn't you arrest me in the temple long before now? You see that? You can feel the heat of this moment. And Jonathan here makes a decision in verse 32. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? That's it. He crossed the line. He made his choice right there. And he's reached the point of no return with his father. And the lesson here is that God will find ways to test our faith, even when it comes with a heavy price tag. And I can only hope that God gives us a boldness and a courage when that happens. Here's something else interesting. Verse 31, as long as the son of Jesse is on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. And for some reason here, Saul is expressing some deep concern over Jonathan's future. And David being a threat to that. He's like, hey, don't you understand what's at stake? Don't you understand what this kid is going to do? Your posterity is at risk. Your future is at risk. Your kingdom is at risk. Your dynasty is at risk. You're seriously going to give it all up for the son of Jesse? And this is how manipulation works, because Saul is wanting to hang on to the one thing that's already been ripped from his hands, the kingdom. So he's trying to hang on to it by being concerned about Jonathan's future. Here's the thing. You can't tempt a man like Jonathan with giving him the very things that our flesh longs for. Fame, wealth, prominence, position, when he's already been sold out for the purpose of God. He doesn't even entertain the thought because he gave David everything that represented his position back in 1 Samuel 18. And he's already made a statement that says, if in God's providence and in his planning, I'm not supposed to be king, you're supposed to be King David, then I will joyfully submit to that. Even if the whole world is offered to him as Satan tempted Jesus, it's very difficult to tempt someone who's completely sold out for Christ. And that is what he's showing here. How do you know Saul is manipulating Jonathan? Well, look at the next verse, verse 33. Then Saul hurled a spear at him to kill David. Interesting. You're so concerned about your son's future, and then the next move, you're trying to kill him with a spear. Good job, Saul. Very simple illustration of a principle we've probably heard before. Our words have no credibility if our actions contradict them. Saul says one thing and does another. Very simple principle, clearly illustrated in 1 John 4:20. If anyone claims to love God yet hates his brother or sister, is a liar. And I read that and I was convicted. It literally felt like God was saying to me, if I tell someone I love them, do I really mean it? If I tell someone that I'm going to pray for them, do I actually do it? It's convicting. Titus 1 verse 15 and 16 says, to the pure all things are pure, but to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and their consciousness are corrupted. They claim to know God, but by their actions they deny him. A simple yet convicting point about our actions being the determining factor of the worth and validity of our claims. So this spear is hurled at him, and we read in that same verse that Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. David was right. And Jonathan's response is incredible. Verse 34. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger on that day, on the second day of the feast. He did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. Of course, this man was angry. He was insulted. His own father tried to kill him. But look at what he was angry for. He was angry for the right reason. Because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. What an amazing picture of one of the hardest teachings of Christ. Death to yourself. Right? I mean, is it possible for us to be so consumed with such love for another person, that even though we're enduring pain, even though we're enduring hurt, you are so unconcerned about yourself because there is someone else who is undergoing shame, disgrace, and injustice? It's possible. It is possible to be so dead to yourself that when it comes to insults being thrown at you, you are unshaken. But when it concerns someone else, you're broken. And I believe this illustration works in two ways. This is not only an illustration of what our love should be like for each other, but I also believe it's an illustration of the devotion that Christ demands for us in our love for him. And what I mean is that our devotion for Christ should run so deep that when it comes to God's name being dishonored, we take up the response of David in 1 Samuel 17. When Goliath dishonored God's name, he had a righteous anger in response. that burns within us. Oh, that we would be filled with such a devotion that it would lead within us a cause that the psalmist wrote in Psalm 119, verse 126. It says, it's time for the Lord to act because your law has been broken. A righteous anger. Paul had a disciple like that named Timothy. Listen to these words he writes in Philippians 2, verse 20. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. Listen to this. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. Timothy was different. Why? Not because he was a great theologian, but because this man's interests were only for that of Christ. Jonathan had the same deal. At this moment, he thought of only one person. David, his best friend. Oh, that Christ would fill us with such love for each other and for him. So what happens? Verse 35 to the end. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him, and when the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. The boy knew nothing about this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons back to the boy and said, "Go, carry them back to the town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. They kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between me and you, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. Beautiful. But did you notice there's some interesting interaction that's dedicated to Jonathan and this little boy? Why this interaction? Well, because this interaction where Jonathan shoots the arrows, the boy goes to retrieve them and comes back, illustrates the simple principle of obedience. Obedience is both the evidence and the definition of our love for Christ. And even when we don't think obeying God will bring the best outcome for us, He's still worthy of our obedience. He says in verse 38, the boy picked up the arrows and returned to his master, even though the boy knew nothing about this. And it's really the simplicity of the Christian life. Because here's the simplicity of this illustration. Trust and obey, for there's no other way. But to be happy in Jesus and to trust and obey. The boy didn't ask questions because that's not childlike faith. Childlike faith is this: I don't understand, Lord, how this command is going to help me in this situation. And in fact, I think it's going to get me into deeper trouble. But even so, I'm still going to trust and obey you. That's childlike faith. Now let's look at the other side of this. You and I as believers, we're called to be correctors, to be rebukers, to be instructors in love and in patience and with great caution. But how much do we value those in our lives willing to call us out if we need it? Do we love the embrace of someone who's willing to wound us more than the kiss of an enemy? Because that's what Jonathan and David illustrate here. David was a man of humility and integrity. And when Jonathan delivers this message, notice in verse 41, he bows to him. He respects him. He honors him. And to those who speak truth in our life, we must show them the same honor, respect, and integrity. And David honored Jonathan. They embraced, they kissed in the traditional Middle Eastern style, and they wept. And David weeps more because his life is now descending further into chaos. And can I be honest with you? When I read that, I was angry. I was angry not because I thought, this is all Saul's fault. I was angry because I believe that if we were more angry about the tolerance and the destructive nature of sin, we would not tolerate it so easily in our life. After they weep, Jonathan says 3 wonderful words. Go in peace. Go in peace, David. I know this hurts. I know this is not what you wanted, but remember, as I said earlier, God is sending you away. So we end on a sad note, but a hopeful note. Go in peace. And David could go into that lifeless wilderness knowing that God had sent him there. And you and I have the great confidence this morning that wherever you are in this moment, God is still sovereign. He's still in control. And what God is going to put David through is absolutely necessary before he becomes king. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this word. We thank you for just the wisdom that you provide through the friendship and the covenant with Jonathan and David. And Father, we just ask that you would apply this word to our hearts and that we would receive it. In your name.